Welcome for this session concerning a day-two match between two teams from the Inter-University Law Debate Tournament. In the Group G, we have the University of Brighton and McGill University will be debating today from a topic received 7 days ago. I give the floor to my colleague, Mr. Bonova.
Thank you very much, and good day to the participating teams, and of course, big thank you and welcome also to the three judges that might already be watching for the live stream of today's match. The topic that the teams have received 7 days in advance is that as shared water systems constitute a common resource essential to all populations, allocation of transboundary freshwater must prioritize minimum populace needs. So the teams have prepared for both sides of the argument. Before we learn which side will be defending which position, I would like to ask the students for the introduction round, starting with University of Brighton, Mr. Badica.
Hello everyone, my name is Peter Badica and I am part of the University of Brighton debate team. It is an honor to meet you all and to have the privilege of debating against the University of McGill's debate team. I can't wait to get started.
Welcome. From McGill University, Mr. Haddad.
Hello, my name is Joe Haddad. I'm a second-year law student at McGill. I competed last year as Monsieur Lorange has rightfully noted in the French version of the debate, and I'm glad to participate in the English version of the debate this year and kind of try to work a bit more on my legal argumentation skills and advocacy skills. So looking forward to it, and University of Brighton is a great university, and love to hear what you guys have prepared for this debate.
Welcome. From University of Brighton, Mr. Hall.
Hello, as you can see, my name is Cameron Hall. I'm a student on the law conversion course, University of Brighton, and conversely, I've heard McGill is also a very good university. So I'm very excited to compete in this here debate. So let the best win.
Yeah, welcome from McGill University, Mr. Ribeiro Toy.
Hi, I'm Samuel Ribeiro Toy. I'm a law student at McGill. I'm extremely excited to compete here today against such a talented opponent. And yeah, that's a little bit about me. I'm very excited to get the debate going.
Welcome, and Mr. Maharis of University of Brighton's team.
Hello, I'm Thomas Atticus Mears. Very happy to represent University of Brighton here. Equally goes, I actually, funnily enough, graduated from McGill, so I only have good things to say about it. Great university, and I'm sure you guys are very, very up to par. I'm excited for this debate, and I hope it goes well.
You're welcome. Also, shout out to your mentors and the coaches that were supporting the teams. And in a few seconds, you should be able to see the wheel for the allocation of positions. If you do, please just give me a confirmation.
Yes.
Thank you. So there are two possibilities for each team to defend in favor or the against position. And in today's debate, it is McGill University's team that will defend the in favor position, thus arguing that as shared water systems constitute a common resource essential to all populations, allocation of transboundary freshwater must prioritize minimum populace needs, and the University of Brighton's team will argue against this motion. You have final 5 minutes to prepare. Feel free to close your cameras and mic. Thank you, everyone. Well done for your preparation. We will now proceed to hear the opening statements, starting with the position in favor. You will now have 4 minutes, McGill University.
Members of the jury, one thing is undisputed. Shared water systems are vital common resources, crucial for all populations. And to manage these resources fairly, cooperation is key. In fact, the UNECE Handbook on Water Allocation in a transboundary context is designed to guide us towards sustainable and equitable ways of sharing fresh water across borders. Now, the issue before this jury is whether the allocation of transboundary fresh water should prioritize minimum population needs. In other words, should basic human survival always come first when it comes to distributing shared water? We submit that it must. Let me start by providing some definitions from our interpretation of the doctrine. Transboundary freshwater refers to systems that cross boundaries between states, provinces, or federated entities. Transboundary highlights that these water resources are shared and require collaboration between different jurisdictions. Minimum population needs refers to the amount of water required for human life, directly and indirectly, which includes water for drinking, but also water for agriculture, sanitation, and health. First, I will submit that recognizing a hierarchy of obligations which prioritizes basic human survival is compliant with what international public law is and ought to be. Second, my colleague will submit that creating such a hierarchy will have positive consequences on economic development. Each submission will be asserted following the IRAC method, that's issue, rule, application, and conclusion, and we will reserve our last two interventions for rebuttals and the conclusion. As I stated, the issue before us is whether there should be a priority, a hierarchy. And my first submission is that we must have one if we want to comply with the spirit of international law. Under Article 11 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, access to the basic conditions of an adequate standard of living is protected, and that necessarily includes access to sufficient water. From this flow three obligations: the duty to respect, meaning states must not interfere with access to water; the duty to protect, meaning they must prevent other states from blocking fresh water when there is a human necessity; and the duty to fulfill, meaning they must take positive steps to ensure people can actually obtain it. We submit, and Article 11 of the Covenant says it, that states have a positive duty to ensure access to adequate water for their populations. This includes drinking water, sanitation, and health, which are critical for human survival. International law clearly asserts that the right to water is a fundamental human right that must be met for human dignity and basic health. Therefore, if there is insufficient water to meet all demands, we respectfully submit that basic survival needs of populations should always take precedence over other uses. Hence, by creating this hierarchy, we're not only protecting the safety of populations as a whole, but also upholding the principles of international public law. Thank you.
Thank you. For the opening statements in the against position, University of Brighton, 4 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this debate is not about denying people drinking water. It is about whether minimum population needs should be an overriding rule that constrains how states allocate shared freshwater resources. In other words, why sacrifice an economically developed future for another glass of water? The affirmative team offers something that is utopic. It sounds good on paper, but even the most beautiful dream, even the most ephemeral, is also unattainable. We on this side are willing to do the hard choices, but the ones that will inevitably give the real results, because we consider that we live in the real world. As a core statement, I would say that transboundary rivers are often shared between upstream developing states and downstream historically advantaged states. If minimum needs automatically override other uses, then downstream high population states would gain structural veto power. Upstream states are prevented from building dams, irrigation, and hydropower. Development asymmetry would become something locked in. And to give you an example, I would take Ethiopia, which is an upstream state, and Egypt, which is a downstream one. If Egypt were to claim minimum needs priority, Ethiopia's development projects would be permanently constrained. My first argument is that economic use sustains survival at scale. Shift from individual survival to it involves shift from individual survival to systemic survival. Water would be used for irrigation, and irrigation generates food security. Water is used for hydropower, and hydropower generates electricity. Water is used for industry, and industry generates employment, and it would enable people to have more jobs and have the possibility to get their own water without having to be at the mercy of the charity from the government. Without these, states would not be able to fund water treatment. Without these, there cannot be maintained infrastructure. You could not build resilience. My claim is that long-term survival depends on economic capacity. If you rigidly prioritize minimum needs, you may reduce food production, reduce electricity, and undermine public health indirectly. My second argument is that international water law prefers balancing and not hierarchy. And I'll give you an example in Europe, in the Danube, the Gabčíkovo-Nagymaros case between Slovakia and Hungary. In that case, international law operated on equitable and reasonable utilization, no significant harm, but most importantly, it demanded that the states engage in good faith negotiation. I did not read anything about international law imposing in that case that minimum needs automatically override all other uses. Shared river systems are governed by cooperative balancing, not by absolute priority rules. And I would also like to give as an example Article 4 from the Nile Cooperative Framework Agreement, negotiated by the very states sharing one of the most politically sensitive river systems in the world. It does not impose a minimum needs first rule. Instead, it adopts equitable and reasonable utilization, requiring all relevant factors, including economic needs and population, to be weighted together.
Thank you very much. We'll now proceed to hear the first rebuttal. McGill University, you have 2 minutes.
Judges, it is our second submission that ensuring basic freshwater access in the transboundary context is one of the most economically efficient policies that a state can adopt. Economic growth depends on basic human capital, public health, and productivity. In a transboundary basin, that means one thing. If upstream allocation decisions leave downstream communities without safe drinking water and sanitation, the economic harm does not stay local. It is not siloed. It spreads across the region through instability, disease burden, but also disrupted labor markets. That's why prioritizing minimum population needs is not a charity in the transboundary allocation, it is economic risk management. The World Bank estimates that an inadequate water supply and sanitation will cost developing countries roughly $260 billion per year and roughly 1.5% of their combined GDP. And the returns point the same way, sorry. Global development evidence shows that each dollar invested in basic water and sanitation generates about a $4 to $7 a yield in economic benefits through lower healthcare costs, higher productivity, and stronger participation in the economy. When communities lack reliable access to clean water, the economic consequences ripple through society because workers miss days due to preventable illnesses, government diverse scarce public funds toward emergency healthcare rather than productive investment, children miss school, and that long term weakens the development of the workforce. The scale of this inefficiency, the scale of this inefficiency is staggering. In many low-income countries, families spend several hours per day collecting water, time that could be better spent for work, education, and economic activity. For purely economic reasons, Trans-Valley freshwater allocation should prioritize minimum population needs.
Thank you. For the first rebuttal in Gagan's position, University of Brighton, 2 minutes.
I'd like to address everyone here. We are not arguing against the availability of water for small populations. What we're arguing against is the motion's idea that these small populations need to be prioritised. And as my opening announced, have this kind of veto. The International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, Article 12, that we will also be referencing, derived from the UN, already mirrors the motion sentiment largely, as it's already evoked. It details that subscriber nations take all available avenues to recognise the rights of everyone to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. This is already an equitable principle, greatly mirroring the notion that is already in action in the world. However, it is only subscribed to by 1/3 of the UN's nations. By placing stringent requirements on nations without respecting their sovereignty, we may run the risk of rubbishing these pre-existing equitable principles through defensive practices and a weaponization of water access. It's not for a monolithic idealist notion to override the self-determinism of states to describe to notions that themselves may not see fit. Take the EU, for example. The EU moderates these water courses through directives and mainly through the WFD, but not placing high-line legal instructions, but allowing for member states to domestically implement these directives in accordance with their own sovereignty. We are not arguing for isolationist practices of nations, rather restricting shared resources to the detriment of others. We're arguing that the motion is wrong in the way to implement this equitable idea. Yes, as previously mentioned, these equitable principles, the basic human needs of water, are greatly pervasive, such as the UN's Water Courses Convention, but sovereignty comes first before international obligations. These ideals are subscribed to, not forced upon nations. By placing these stringent international rules on nations, it may run the risk of these previously mentioned offensive practices as an affront to their nation's sovereignty and thus weaponizing said access to water. Sovereignty is a non-negotiable, and all other obligations may be obliged when the nations see fit on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. For the second rebuttal, McGill University, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. The opposition's strongest argument is that long-term survival depends on economic uses. Exactly. So meet the floor first. My colleague rebutted this by explaining that the hierarchy that we're trying to put in place leads to better economic development. But even if it doesn't, irrigation or energy matter, but they can be rationed, they can be scheduled, they can be substituted, and they can be compensated. Human survival cannot be compensated, cannot be substituted. If people lack basic water, the whole system becomes illegitimate. Because if populations face dehydration, disease, or displacement, you don't get stable development. You get crisis, and not just for those facing direct hardships. Minimum needs are not anti-development. They're just a precondition for long-term economic growth. The opposition pushes this narrative of the economy versus people, a narrative, but the real trade-off is wasteful uses of water versus uses that are essential to life. And again, we're not pitting the economy versus the survival of populations. And if we go back to my definition of minimum population needs, it englobes uses that sustain human life directly, but also uses that sustain human life indirectly, which is such as agriculture, which, as we know, helps to fight food insecurity. Thank you.
Thank you. For the second rebuttal, University of Brighton, 2 minutes.
The problem, however, that my opponent has presented is very true. But take the case of France versus Spain in 1957 on the arbitration of Lake Lanu. Despite France's large population, the how and why that France was using the water was deemed to outweigh that of Spain's. We may be in a paradoxical event of disadvantaging a large population as we are removing a vital resource of it being used to a greater extent. It's a paradoxical proposition to note a small nation as having a greater need with little reasoning as to why. But giving nations downstream its ultimate view to this is possibly incur inequitable results, a punching up the ladder per se. Small nations do not need a paternalistic scope to protect them. what they need is dialogue and consideration, and not a prioritization that places them above for no real reason. Spain built its argument on these hypothetical propositions, building it on future harm, mirroring that of the motion. Upstream states are not automatically restricted to an equitable idea of fair use, as this is an entirely abstract idea that does not reflect the reality of practices within states. Sovereignty of use is not displaced, and such sovereign use reflects a real use for the water over feigned ideas of wants and needs. As put before, this is a paternalistic sentiment that arguably has no place in the international legal sense. And even then, water itself is not a just cause norm, as legality prevails over an idea of equitable principles. As we are arguing, we cannot infringe on a nation's sovereignty by parlaying hardline rules upon certain nations. This was illustrated in the International Court of Justice's rejection of the Danube sharing a common heritage, therefore going against the Hungary and Czechoslovakia treaties. By honoring these humanitarian arguments, much like that of the case of Lake Lanu, we may be incurring wider problems of not only nations being disproportionately being affected, but also treaties simply being rubbish due to the idea of it not being the right thing to do. The right thing to do is completely subjective. We are not arguing for nations to be starved of water, but that the motion itself is inherently flawed in the way it seeks to implement it.
Thank you. We'll now proceed to hear the closing statements, starting with McGill University for in favor position. 2 minutes.
Members of the jury, at the end of this debate, the question before you is quite simple. When water is scarce, what must come first? Life or leverage? The opposition asks that you treat all water uses as equal. But unlike what they say, that is neither equitable nor reasonable. Equity does not mean treating unequal things the same. A liter of water used for industrial expansion is not the same as a liter of water used for drinking. One creates profit, the other preserves life. And international law recognizes that. Under Articles 11 and 12 of the International Covenant, articles that the opposition has cited, states must guarantee the conditions necessary for adequate standard of living at the highest standard of health. These obligations cannot exist without the sufficient and safe water required for a country's development and a country's minimum needs. Water is therefore not a simple commodity in international law. It is the precondition of dignity, of health, and survival. And we presented two arguments today. One, that the water already respects, that priority respects international law. And the second argument, that even from a purely economic perspective, the logic also holds. Because when communities lack access to water, disease spreads, productivity fails, and our economies weaken. When basic water access is secured, however, populations are healthier, labor participation increases, and development becomes possible. So we ask you to affirm a simple principle today, justices, one that is both legally grounded and deeply human. When water is scarce, survival must come first, because an allocation that protects life is equitable, and because an allocation that preserves dignity is reasonable. Thank you very much.
Thank you. For closing statements in the against position, University of Brighton.
My ladies, my lords, honorable members of the jury, the affirmative is delving into extremist scenarios. The best outcomes, I would remind everyone, is that the said outcomes would naturally come from an approach closer to the center, closer to compromise, and closer to good faith cooperation. Honorable justices, at its core, this debate is not about whether human beings deserve access to water. Of course they do. Minimum access to water is essential for life, and no one on this side denies that. The real question before you is different. The question is, what principle should guide the allocation of water in shared river systems? Should we adopt a rigid rule that always prioritizes minimum population needs above all other uses? Or should we rely on the framework that currently governs transboundary rivers? Should we not rely on cooperative balancing, equitable utilization, and shared economic incentives, as we have shown in Europe and the Nile? Of course, over the course of this debate, we have shown that the second model is the one that actually works. I will reference now another case that I think should be of notice. In 2017, the Hague Institute analyzed the cooperation between China, India, Bhutan, and Bangladesh And it shows that cooperation, even in this basin, does not rely on a rigid rule, prioritizing minimum downstream needs. Instead, it is built on negotiated balancing, economic integration, and sector-wide cooperation, including hydropower development, trade links, and data sharing mechanisms. This insight is called the zone of possible effective cooperation, and the most realistic future cooperation scenario is the basin is not the rigid hierarchy of water rights. Instead, it is a system based on basin-wide cooperation, economic integration, and so forward. We are not giving you a utopic dream. We are giving you a real, stable scenario that we know it works.
Thank you very much for your concluding statements. You can all now relax. You are no longer under evaluation at this point. Well done on completing your match and on researching and presenting your researched and prepared arguments for today. The three judges will, of course, have 2 working days to review your match and submit the scoring cards. Once we do that, you will most likely receive your results around Monday or the first half of next week. But already we have an option to do a short feedback session with all of you present. On that note, I would like to invite you to share your experience or thoughts on the topic, on your preparation, and if you perhaps heard familiar arguments from the opposing team from your research. Starting with the University of Brighton's team, Mr. Badika.
Thank you. Could you repeat the question one more time, please?
Yes, very simply, how did you find today's debate and the topic?
I found today's debate particularly engaging, and I enjoyed to hear the very persuasive arguments, in my opinion, of the affirmative team. I have especially learned something new, and we should all think about the gifts that the rivers around us provide and how we treat them. Moreover, me and the team had a very challenging but also very rewarding week, because we planned in great joy and with great effectiveness how to prepare for this debate.
Thank you for sharing. Mr. Haddad of McGill University, how was it for you?
Well, it's definitely a very interesting topic. The one thing that I did notice is our different approaches in debating on the sources we cited. And I mean, that might be the McGill and me speaking, but we learned the civil law and the common law. And from our side, we were looking more in terms of what the convention said, what the article of the convention said. And we were looking more on that on those codified terms, whereas the University of Brighton was looking more into jurisprudence and different cases in which the topic was addressed. So I could see that there's like kind of this contrast between different legal traditions, the civil law and the common law, and it's very interesting to see. Sorry.
Thank you. From University of Brighton, Mr. Hall, how was the topic and the exchange today?
Yeah, the topic is very interesting, but I mean, on the difference between the civil and common law, I mean, as the old saying goes, there's a difference between how the law is written and how it's practiced. So, I mean, there's some very interesting arguments. I mean, I was kind of banking for doing the 4, because if it presented the economical one that we had, could have easily quoted the Harman Doctrine as this being this evil doctrine, and that would have eradicated the argument. But overall, I think it was a really, really interesting topic, and I think we did pretty well as a group, as an entirety, because I mean, it's a bit hard to argue against giving people water, but I mean, we'll see what happens.
Indeed. Mr. Ribeiro of McGill University, same question.
Yeah, it's a very good topic. I think it's one of those disputes where you have on one side a very strong moral argument, and on the other side you have a very strong legal argument. So sometimes you have to. I think our approach was trying to kind of rely on the morality, because we do know that at least as law is practiced right now, it tends to go the other way. But yeah, it's a very I think because the timing of the oral arguments is so short, it's a very interesting, I guess, exercise of being very succinct and just addressing very key points. But also, it's great to practice advocacy and things alike. So it's been a very interesting debate for sure.
Thank you. And Mr. Maheris of University of Brighton, how did you find the exchange today?
Today, I thought it was very pleasant. I liked it a lot, actually. Researching, I researched the affirmative side. That's why I didn't speak today. We kind of split it up in that way. But I found it almost frustrating that every time I'd find an argument for one side, you'd find a counter argument for the other side, and then vice versa all the time. It's a non-conclusive motion, which is a great thing for a debate. But I knew when I was making my arguments, I knew what the counter argument was to already. And so it kind of creates this cycle where you go down and down into further holes and try and find anything conclusive. And then, like Mr. Roberto Tua correctly summarized, you have to kind of play in the more moral side if you're on the affirmative, and more on the legal side the other way. And so it comes down to, yeah, really that kind of a thing. I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you. And usually we wrap up the matches with a bit of networking. So today we do have two questions. So they would be posed to you as a team. You can choose if all of you answer or just one person from the team. And the first question would be, you already hinted at it in your feedback for today's round, but what is the skill or the aspect of legal reasoning that you would say you were challenged the most in preparation or in the debates themselves so far? So first, starting with the University of Brighton.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was the very the arguments against like equity and the law. You know, like do you either go by the black letter or do you actually go by what is actually right? Because I mean, it was a very very difficult like proposition because as I said earlier, we were all kind of thinking, oh, if we get the for, it's going to be good. We've got some good ones. And then if you get the against, you're almost like arguing for a scene out of Mad Max almost. Like, yeah, there's no water for anyone. So I think it was just trying to take out your own personal ideas of it, just going very straight. Like, this is what the law says. This is how it's practiced. This is what the conventions say. This is how the conventions are actually practiced. This is what nations actually do. I mean, it's a very different idea between having a very nice idea or this like utopic idea of everyone having access to water. But I mean, it's been a pressing problem. It'll always be a pressing problem. So it's having to kind of step into the shoes of the people that are almost restricting it. That kind of threw us for a loop a bit, I think.
Indeed. If your colleagues would like to add.
Well, I might add that I think the debate was kind of fraught with traps in a way. You have to walk a very careful line on both sides as well. The affirmative risks making a purely moral argument that has no basis in law, and then the affirmative risks making a argument that makes them sound like bad people, not to swear of anything, but you don't sound like a very good person unless you curtail your argument very, very carefully on both sides. So I thought it was good in that way. There are lots of traps everywhere, and I think everybody avoided them pretty effectively, actually.
Also, if I may, I would add that I completely agree with the two extremes you can go, becoming very moral or becoming very inherently evil. But I think the catch is to know that the law is not moral. It's only one, and getting it right gets you where you need to be.
During your practice, I believe you will face a lot of challenges on how to apply the law and where to find the lines. And on that note, the same question, which skills or which aspects of legal reasoning were you utilizing the most in your preparations or in the debate itself? So McGill University.
I would say we just we lean back on our comfort zone. Like we're comfortable doing the Iraq method, just clearly stating what the issue is, and we kind of took the motion, articulated it in an issue, and then really went off like both positions with the rule and what the rule says, and then we really had like a paragraph prepared of what different sources say, and then we went to apply those sources based on our interpretation of them and of what the doctrine says. So because we had this like structure in mind, I feel like it kind of helped us like not go off the cuff, but yeah, I guess just we were grounded in a position and then followed that structure, and that kind of helped us go where we wanted to go and get to the conclusions we wanted to get to.
Yeah, I'll jump on here. I think it's kind of like he said, but also I think it's really hard to debate without having a factum. In terms of we're not submitting anything to a judge that actually knows what we're submitting. So the whole purpose of our arguments are purely oral. So there you have to have an exercise of being a little bit more clear when you speak, because if a judge has your written arguments beforehand, then you could kind of skip a few steps just to make the conclusion still hold. um, and yeah, I think like my friends from Brighton said, the law is harsh, and from the get go we kind of saw that it wasn't on our side. But at least here in North America, what we see is it's that the times of the law is harsh. So even if the outcome is harsh, we should still get that outcome. Like dura lex lex, like they say. Uh, Here in Canada, at least what we see is that that doesn't really hold anymore. So if sometimes you have a position that is not the common position, but holds in law some way, but is also the moral position, then you kind of aim for that, and that's a bit how we tried to work this. So I think at the end of the day, we both teams did a very good job in being very clear about their position.
And the final question before we wrap up is whether or not you had a chance to either watch the debates of this year's edition that are happening in parallel. Already day one is almost concluded, and day two you're in the second half of the rounds of the matches for this round. So perhaps was there a debate or a topic or perhaps even a team that inspired you or motivated you in your own preparations, or just in general for the topic that was discussed? So first to McGill University.
If I may start, I would say that I watched before the first round. I watched the debate. I don't remember the teams, but I watched the debate. I think it was 2 years old, and it was whether or not the resources of the Antarctica should be exploitable. And I was really impressed with the arguments, but I also saw that the competition is very approachable, and if you're confident, probably you'll get it right.
Thank you. And then perhaps your teammates from University of Brighton.
I'm so sorry I took the turn of Miguel's. I'm so sorry I got over them. I didn't hear properly. Really, I'm really sorry. I apologize for that. Sorry guys from McGill University. I'm really sorry for this mistake. It wasn't intentional.
No worries, Vlad. We'll gladly take you at McGill if you want to come. If you want to transfer, we'll.
I did apologize like a Canadian. Uh, I'll add on that I did watch a few of the previous debates, but I was really looking at the style more than the content. I think the content from what I found researching the past two debates is going to be pretty similar on both sides. It's more the way that you structure your arguments, the kind of debate tricks and astutes and stuff that you use to get your point across more effectively is what really makes the difference when you win, because we all have access to exactly the same sources. We all have law trove, we all have this stuff. So it's really who presents it better, who formulates their idea in a more convincing way, I found from watching previous ones.
Yeah, building on that, I mean, I've also been looking forward to it as well, to the well, hopefully to the later debates, like when the motions start to really ramp up. Because I mean, they've been very interesting so far, but you can only expect that the higher the rounds go, the more pressing the issues get, so the more hard line it's going to be, the more you're going to have to kind of be that I don't know, to quote Denning, to be that reasonable man that has to be able to actually formulate their ideas completely separate from their own ideals.
And then now to McGill.
I did my due diligence on the University of Brighton. That's that's the video I watched. But I also looked at my friends who are competing in the French edition too, McGill University. But yeah, mainly on the University of Brighton, and I was impressed. And I told Samuel, we had to be prepared. So I hope we were able to deliver to the same level as you guys.
Yeah, we did our due diligence like this was an M&A deal or something. But it's I think the timing was something that was stressing us because uh like in private law at least, or like in the traditional Mooney setting, you get like 40 minutes to oral arguments, and sometimes you could, you know, if you think about a creative argument in the get-go, or during the debate, you could kind of take time to think about it, because it could be quite long, but with 2 minutes you have to be very very straightforward. And so that's why we kind of looked at other debates, and we saw that the quality of the participants is quite high, so that got us a little bit stressed, but that was a good motivation to do better research, so that was all good.
If I may jump in quickly, I think one of my favorite parts about this debate is, because we've all got a LinkedIn here, it's seeing the profile views of like out of nowhere saying, someone from McGill University like viewed your profile like 40 minutes ago, and you're like, oh no, we're really getting scoped out. So, but yeah, I mean, it's been really enjoyable so far.
Right. We really do encourage you guys to stay in contact. So you already know LinkedIn is one way. There is also another networking event planned for mid-edition break in April. But more on that in future communications through emails. And now passing forward to Professor Larange to wrap us off.
Yes, well done for this match. That was really pleased. Oh, sorry. Yes, my apologies. Well done again for this match. That was a great day 2 match for this Group G, and we'll be very happy to see, of course, the next one coming. So yeah, we encourage that you keep contact. In the other match, so tomorrow, actually, Tilburg University, which already had a match against Brighton, and will have a match against McGill University. We'll have the match against Auckland University of Technology. So Auckland is starting now as well in the day 2, and there will be as well a finishing with their match against McGill University. So yes, don't hesitate to watch as well the match of your opponents, and as well from other groups, because you never know if you will meet some of them in the elimination phase. So voilà, so it's all I wanted to tell. Many thanks again, that was a great match. Congratulations, and we'll keep in touch. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you very much.